burning grass.
Part 2.
Okay.
Welcome back. We are back with Dan Elliot, Gary Grimes, and Warren Johnson. Last time we were together, we had a good time, and I appreciate you guys being able to make it back in. We haven't changed our shirts since, but that's all right.
Hadn't been home.
Hadn't even been home, but the magic of radio, all right? Last time we were together, we were talking about safety innovations and crashes and things like that. And I just want to touch on one particular crash because I couldn't believe it happened because it was a testing accident, not a racing accident. I had just left the track, and then one of my students calls me and tells me what happened, and I thought, you're kidding me, of all things. And that was a little mishap you were in, Warren. Tell us about it.
Yeah, we were just testing. It was about this time of the year. There's a lot of pollen on the track.
You were at Commerce, right?
Yeah, we were at Commerce. We were only going 8th mile. And I had already shut the car off, and we had a heck of a crosswind that day. It just picked the car up, turned it upside down, went straight into the wall, and slid along. It hit the wall at 65 G's negative on the data recorder.
And see, the cars, they don't make the safety systems for doing this stuff upside down. Did that have any effect?
Whether you're upside down or right side up, the vehicle's still somewhat of a crush zone. And I came up with the poured seats way before NHRA ever mandated them.
Okay.
Because I felt that that's really a real problem area, especially after we put the funny car cage in, which I had the first one in 1985, that you got to keep the body velocity down. Because when it builds up velocity, then it hits something solid, that's where you get into trouble. You break bones, tear organs, and whatnot. With the width of the seat belts and the 5-point harness at the time, it kept the body from moving. And I wasn't even black and blue after hitting it that hard.
No kidding. Wow.
A little sore, but that was about it.
Were you the first racer to pour seats, or were other series using poured seats at that time?
I had poured seats probably 7 or 8 years before they were mandated.
Really? So how were you pouring the seats?
Basically the same way they do them now. I actually made a carbon fiber shell to start with.
Right.
Because I wanted that part is strong. And typical race car, you're trying to build it as light as possible. And then you could still move around in there no matter how, because it didn't fit the body. So that's why we took the garbage bags and styrofoam beads and resin and poured it in there, sat there until it went off. Got a little warm there for a while, but that took a little experimenting to get that part right. But once you did that, then you put it in that carbon shell that was already there.
That was it.
The proverbial saying, fit like a glove, exactly what it was.
Wow. Amazing. All right, so we're not street racing anymore. We're racing for to make a living. You're taking your family on the road with you, Warren, right?
Correct.
All right. What were you getting to the track in? Were you driving the car to the track? Were you trailering it, or how did it all start?
No, when it first started, I had when it very first, we had a trailer we towed it on, and then I got a box truck, oil-inlet box truck that we used for probably 5, 6, 7 years. And when I got the first Oldsmobile program, that was the first tractor trailer in 1983.
Wow, all those years on an open trailer, yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Gary, how were you getting to and from the track?
Well, same way. I used mainly pickup trucks, even though I always had a love for station wagons because I never had a Suburban or that type vehicle, but the good old open trailers. Got many miles under me, such as I think everyone did that time frame, because you were dragging them everywhere.
Yeah.
You know?
And sometimes multiple times a week.
Yes, indeed. There's no doubt about that, because you were racing multiple times a week during race season.
Yeah.
But now you had that, and you got to learn everything it takes about road maintenance. Wee hours of the morning, you do real good.
Road what?
Road maintenance.
Road hard?
Yeah.
So, no, that was pretty well it. And probably, for me, my first properly enclosed rig was probably sometime in 73, because I thought the neatest thing in the world was when the crew cab dualies came around. Matter of fact,
A lot of the
first
guys
time-
had the ramp trucks.
oh my gosh, I went all over everywhere prior to my racing with the super stock guys and all, and the funny car guys and those old trucks. And there's nothing friendly about the Fords or the D-Series Dodges that I know of. Even though the sponsors at the time really liked them because they were really looked good running up down the road with their names on them, it did a lot of bodily harm.
Dan, how about you? You eventually wound up driving the rig, working on the crew, and putting the cars together.
Oh, I drove the rig from an early age. First trip we made to Michigan, that was 77, I believe. It was stake body truck. Daddy had a stake body truck he had traded in, and the clutch almost didn't make it. It had no idea going to some of the races and going to Pocono and Michigan and so forth. You've got a few hills and valleys and road maintenance, is that what you call it? Well, we didn't know what that was, obviously, but the first real truck came after Daddy carried the team as far as he could carry it, and that was up to the end of '81. And when Daddy passed away, I knew he had kept a lot of the canceled checks. You used to get the checks back. You don't get that anymore. You get pictures now, and I wanted all of the old checks and stuff. I wanted to go through a lot of that stuff to get an idea of I knew working at the Ford place because it funded the deal for a long time during that, because Daddy was kind of old school in the fact that he never asked anybody anything he wouldn't do himself. So he didn't go out and ask people for a lot of money. I can remember him asking for some money when they needed a new set of tires or something, but Daddy was old school, and he loved to pretty much, he wasn't going to do anything he wouldn't ask you to do anything he wouldn't do himself. And pretty much he made the money, he funded the car, and it's not as it is today where you had the sponsors and things like that. The early years were tough. And he spent, I totaled up $500,000 in 81, and I quit totaling sometime before I got through all the checks of 81, and he'd spent over $500,000 in 81.
Wow.
On one of the tire bills was $90,000, and how do you make a small fortune in racing? Start with a large one. And the first transporter, I'll get back to the point here, the first transporter was when we sold a Melling, which Daddy didn't get very much for what assets he had in the team when he sold a Melling, but Melling enabled us to have the opportunity to, the first transporter, they had a road tractor. It was a cab over Kenworth, and they transformed it. They rebuilt the engine, and it had a 430 Detroit in it, and that was our first tractor trailer. They bought a trailer from one of the teams that had quit racing. They bought a single car trailer, and I pulled it. And I remember going to Michigan and getting the tractor, and actually got the tractor and the trailer because they painted it. And I was amazed at how fast that thing would run uphill and downhill, and got myself in trouble quite a few times with it. But it would run, because one of the things on the CB, and I love this, was somebody asked me on CB one time, said, well, the race car runs as fast as the truck will. And I said, no, I said it won't. But,
So who was your crew at that time?
we had a small crew. There was only probably about 5 full-time people, if we had that. And really it was me, Ernie, and Bill, and some friends that we grew up with from home there. And were it not for the volunteers, the early years, you'd have never made it without the volunteers.
Right, absolutely. Gary, how was your crew on the road?
For most part, there was generally 2 to 3 of us.
Okay.
Generally on it. One of them, other than myself, was always family. My brother spent a lot of time with me on my road. There again, when I could, my father and brother, and there was always a gentleman that seemed to always have time that used to be on the road with us a lot. So basically, my road crew was usually 3 people on it there. And basically, we shared everything because the driving back then was huge driving, especially when you went to that other coast. I can still remember pulling out of Pomona, California, and the following week having to be in Florida. And for me, it was 52 hours from the time we left the track till we got to Atlanta.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just hard realizing you got to drive up that mountain both ways. It seems like, but you know, we did it.
What was your
52 hours? We made it in 33.
I'm
San Jose.
Do you have any awards for that one, sir?
Nope, not one.
Congratulations.
who was your crew, Warren?
Only had 3. Well, actually 4 with the dog.
Yeah,
It was
with the
Arlene,
dog. Yeah,
Kurt, and myself, and that was it.
that was it. Man,
Now, I got to say this. Does it seem to you like that the women were stronger than the men were as far as holding everything together? The strength for us seemed to be in the women of they were tougher than the men for what they had to put up with and what they lived through. Especially, and I'm looking more so at NASCAR because I don't know how drag racing was as far as I imagine they let the women in and the kids in and so forth, which we didn't. Yeah. So it was just so hard for us because keeping a family together was tough because you were kind of frowned on for having the family there and it didn't make it easy. Not easy at all.
I know I could speak for myself there. I don't know if I would have gotten, number one, I know I wouldn't have got to do what I got to do. But especially at the level that I was trying to operate at, and I know Warren, just from being around him at the track a few years back, you know, I joke about his wife and his dog and what have you there. You know, it's always been Warren's family. You know,
right.
Warren's family. You know, it's just one word. And I say that with great respect because I think I know how he's going to answer the same question. So without a doubt, women were a huge part of mine. They took a lot of weight off of me, big time.
well, there were times when Arlene drove the truck.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Hell, she had a CDL, too.
Yeah,
Wow.
I got to tell you a story. Warren, this applies to. I had 2 of my students come to you and work, you know, on the team as interns. Donnie and I'll think of his name and Kevin. Kevin Gainey?
I don't recall.
I'm trying to think. He went to IMSA racing. I'll think of it at 3 o'clock in the morning. But anyway, they came and they both had their CDLs. And the first thing they had to do was the West Coast run. And they were both terrified.
Yeah.
I mean, they're working for the professor. They don't want to screw anything up. And, you know, they were just telling me they were terrified the whole time, the 2 of them driving those trucks.
Yeah, there was a lot of responsibility involved in any form of racing as far as the transporter crew.
You got the car, you got the rig, man.
We really drilled it into them. We can't race if we don't get there.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that was primary. And we're lucky we never had any accidents. All the miles we put on over the years for 40 years. Never had any highway
And both
accidents.
of them said that Arlene was the adopted mom.
Yeah.
She was the den mother. She took care of all the rest of it. And they loved her like crazy because, it was Kevin Gainey, and I'll think of Donnie's last name, and I'm, like I say, at 3 o'clock in the morning when I figure everything out.
I can't imagine being that way as far as talked to that way because I was always threatened.
Yeah.
You got to be there at this time and this time, and you better be there.
Well, Dan, there was another way of treating people.
Well, you know, we've so far we've talked a lot about, you know, buying race cars you could buy off the showroom and turn into a race car, and then at some point in time they weren't strong enough. They, you know, for the speeds and things that were going on. Warren, tell us about the funny car cage era.
Well, actually, our first cars were probably like the NASCAR cars. I was a structural steel welder, making $1.39 an hour back then.
Jeez, yeah.
Went to Chevy dealership, bought a brand new Camaro.
Mm-hmm.
Only thing I had in the option was a radio and a heater. Drove it home and turned it into a pro stock car. That was back then. Of course, we were only going 140 miles an hour and a quarter, 139, something like that. Not going 200 plus. So they were pretty basic vehicles, but as the speeds elevated, the safety had to go with it, and that's where actually I was witnessed a fatality at Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Mickey Tadlock, racer from Texas. He he crashed, got on the brakes too hard, crashed, and he had the single point shoulder harness on it. Well, he impacted, then got a side impact, slipped out of the shoulder harness, and then final impact, his head hit the front roll bar, crushed his skull. So I'm looking at, NHRA asked me to just look at the chassis part of it, and I'm looking at it. That's when I figured we've got to contain the body. If it doesn't build up any velocity, it's not going to get hurt as bad. And that's where I came up with the different shoulder harnesses and the funny car cage to contain you in there.
Now, this is when you were racing NHRA, right?
NHRA, correct. That was
Now, I wanted to you used to race some IHRA and
IHRA, AHRA, UDRA.
You were running what they call the muscle mountain motor cars,
Correct.
big block cars. What was the difference between those cars and what we know of now as the Pro Mods? I take away the fuel injection and the blowers and all that stuff. Were these straight axle cars back then, or like gassers, or
They were crude pro stock cars, tube frame cars.
Okay, they were tube frame.
And
Okay.
well, that's why I came down south to race, because they're mountain motor cars, which were, I think the Fords were using that Can-Am block, 429 block
Yep.
that they had,
Yep.
aluminum block, and Chevys had a block cast by a guy named Paul Wright in Ohio with a Siamese bore. So most of the GM cars are 632 to 640 cubic inch. And I went down there with my big motor. It was 452 cubic inches. But it was reliable, and it was just as fast as their mountain motor cars. I mean, they were big, but they're inefficient.
Right. What was yours based on?
Just standard big block Chevy.
Big block Chevy, yeah.
And they didn't understand efficiency. Their approach to racing was just make it bigger, it'll be better. Well,
Bigger's better.
if you're a midget, you can't swing a 15-pound baseball bat.
Right. And you were stuck with what you had, Dan, as far as small block
Yeah,
stuff.
because NASCAR limited you what cubic inch, and sometime in the mid '70s they came from the big inch, the 427 inch, 435 inch to the 358 inch, and that basically is where me, Ernie, and Bill cut our teeth on all the small block stuff. That was, Daddy ran some of the big block stuff with Charles Barrett and so forth, and he ran a little bit of that stuff, but I don't know, like in pro stock, you're 500 inch now. Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I don't know what you'd be running speed wise if it was like you go to Kazi, and I was looking at one the other day, and it was 821 cubic inch, and a lot of that mountain motor stuff. And I don't know where you'd be speed wise. You'd be running 8th mile or less, because I'm in awe at what those Pro Mods will run. I'm in awe of what they will run. But yeah, we were limited to cubic inches as well as a lot of other things. They put us inside a box, and I don't know if that was good or bad, but I told Mike Helton one time, I said, I've got the cure for your deal of limiting engines and stuff. I said, just put the grandstands on the inside of the racetrack and just let them go. And he wasn't too thrilled about that one. So, yeah, I've got ideas of how you do that, but they weren't too thrilled about that. But, yeah, the good thing was, I guess we did get limited, but it was always in racing, it seems like you've had to make your own stuff, engineer your own stuff, and seems like Ford was less cooperative in building stuff for racing, or performance-wise, it seems like they were always behind the curve to me compared to GM, and I may be out of school on that, but the different things, it seems like everything that you got for the Chevrolet, you could go to the junkyard, buy a lot of stuff, do a lot of stuff. With the Ford stuff, you had to go home. You bought it, you went home and remade it because it didn't fit, or they changed patterns, so forth, and it was just more difficult to race with a Ford, our experience, than it was a Chevrolet. Drag racing might have been a different deal, but for the racing we were in, short track, otherwise, it was difficult to run a Ford.
Gary, what were your customers running? Everything?
For the most part, yeah. When I go back to me on a personal level, my heavy involvement with factory stuff basically started in the '68 and on the Chrysler side of things. And again, it was all 426 based, 426 Hemi based stuff. And those motors were basically running configuration around 426s. And then when we took them to NHRA, not my own personal car, but the cars I was involved with, and we had to run pounds per cubic inch, there's not a whole lot of efficiency in a 426 basic design from 1964. When you go to pounds per cubic inch and you got to run it, we couldn't get them any smaller than 366 inches. So immediately it became non-competitive. It was always obsolete anyhow.
Right, yeah.
Me on the other side of it, I was running the Chevrolet stuff because, and again, I did do the small block Chevrolet world, but I immediately went to the big blocks because what opened for me and helped pay for my racing was match racing. And what came to me, and Warren somewhat alluded to it a minute ago, is we had national events we could go to and run, but in my case, probably 80% of my racing was at the smaller venues, and match racing financially was very good for me. I was very lucky in my early ages. I got to do testing for the manufacturers, and probably the best testing I ever did had to do with the tire manufacturers because not only were you allowed different equipment to work with and to be able to test equipment, you were allowed the freedom of learning and testing stuff with their equipment, and it paid big dividends. You know, there again, we're in a world of, hundreds of thousands. We are. It doesn't matter if you're going in a circle or you're in a drag strip, and you pay attention to that. And if I'm saying anything out of line from what you gentlemen think, tell me what your input is. But I can't say enough of the testing I got to do. Mm-hmm. But my whole world was basically tied up in some configuration of my racing of the big block Chevrolet, and it went through a lot of evolutions. In the time that I was involved with it.
Warren, you had an opportunity for a while there, and I can't remember the initials that it was named now, but for a while you were dealing with some Oldsmobile stuff.
Well, that's actually Oldsmobile approached me in 1978 to get involved with their program, and I asked them what they have available, and they said they don't really have a drag race program, but they're working on a lot of engine configurations. So I said, well, okay, I'll take a look. I'll play with this thing just out of curiosity more than anything else. And that's where I got access to a lot of GM's engineering facilities and a lot of first-off castings that weren't available. So there was a real learning period in there. So when the Oldsmobile drag race program came along in '83, they gave me free rein on the design of the DRCE engine.
Okay, that's it, yeah.
So I designed the DRCE 1, 2, and 3 engines.
Were they big block, small block?
It started out as really an offshoot of the big block Chevy, but that has a lot of problems. Kind of like a big block Ford had a lot of problems that could have been addressed, but, you got profit and street engines here and racing over here. And a lot of times they just don't blend. So the second iteration of the DRCE engine, they got pretty serious about it. So we were able to reconfigure it as far as bore space and deck height and a lot of oiling issues and whatnot. So it made a reliable piece. And along with that, cylinder heads. So it eventually outclassed the big block Chevy to make the big block Chevy non-competitive. And those things right now, 500 cubic inches, they'll make 3 horsepower per cubic inch.
Oh, wow.
Naturally aspirated.
Yeah. You're a naturally aspirated guy.
Oh, yeah. If you got to put power adders on there, you didn't build it right in the first place.
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask you about an engine I saw on the dyno last time I was at the shop. But all right, so you had options, you had access to test equipment you couldn't have had otherwise. When did I'll go back to Warren for a minute. When did you put your first dyno in? Because before then it was just seat of the pants.
Oh, yeah. Actually, didn't get our first dyno until about 1982, somewhere in that 82 or 83.
How does it compare to the dyno you have now?
Really, it's just a yardstick.
There you go.
You know, everybody says, well, I can only make so much power in this dyno. I'm going to go over that dyno because it makes more power. No, the engine makes the same damn power.
Yeah.
If you aren't fast enough on this dyno, you got to build a better engine. That's what it amounts to.
Yeah.
And it's just a tool. It's no better than a 9/16 wrench. You just have to learn to use it as a tool. And with the sophistication of the dynos now, where you're able to measure acceleration rates and times and this, that, and whatnot, you can pinpoint exactly what that thing is going to run, regardless of what the horsepower number is.
Yeah, the horsepower and torque is, yeah. It's Gary, when did you get your first dyno?
Well, I got my first one in probably 89, 90.
Mm-hmm.
I had my first exposures to it many years prior to that. Matter of fact, my first dyno wasn't equipped with data acquisition. And the fact of standing around with 6 of your buddies, and it doesn't matter, if your dogs, Warren, could have talked, they would have been part of this deal. Mm-hmm. But you sit around with your notebooks and you took data points.
Right.
Somewhat guessing data points, for lack of a better term. But I guess the best thing as far as dynos goes, I can't say enough that's not positive about dynos, period. Dots a lot of I's, crosses a lot of T's, specifically with your engine program, and you know how a vehicle works on the track. But that data acquisition thing, and it has evolved tremendously, as Warren talking about what he can look at now, and I can only imagine what his dyno do versus what my antiquated stuff at this point in time would do. But just a great learning tool. Just a great learning tool.
Dan, what were you using as a dyno in your shop?
Superflow, probably the late 70s was the first one we had, and it was antique to say. But Warren, you're right. Your dyno is a baseline, and you're setting a baseline. And the ultimate thing for the early dyno was you set a baseline. You knew what horsepower it produced through the range. Acceleration, you couldn't factor in that one. On our stuff, you couldn't.
Not the early ones, no.
Not the earlies. And what you ended up doing was you took those numbers, you did the printout, and then you went to the racetrack. And the racetrack told part of the story. It didn't tell all the story because we learned everybody accused us of cheating in '85 when we got to running really good. And really, it took a while to do this, but we figured out that unless the engine could breathe, unless it could get air, it wasn't going to run, because you go to Daytona and Talladega, and that was the ultimate yardstick of how the motor picked up, and really it got into a combination of things, because I learned a lot about gear ratios, and for qualifying, you got 2 laps qualifying, so you start on pit road, and really it was how the car accelerated up to and down the back straight, and how the engine pulled, how it got air and how it pulled, because it basically was like you listened to the motor down the back straight, and some of them it sounded just like it was pulling a subsoiler, and it would not accelerate, it would not pick up, and once you figured out how to get air to the engine, because actually what happened in '85, we learned this on the brick car, the '82 Thunderbird, was that actually you, instead of laying the windshield back a little bit, you actually raise the windshield a little forward so that it would put a pressure at the base of the windshield.
Correct.
So it would feed the cowl, because NASCAR dictated where the air came in. You couldn't just pull air from anywhere. You couldn't pressurize. So you learned how to feed that cowl at the base of the windshield. So this is where each element of the car, no matter what it was, each element of the car factored in. And a little gain here and a little gain here and a little gain here. But because I was going to ask Gary and Warren both, the innovation that for us, I think that was the first innovations, was the mag helic gauges to figure out the pressures on the car and figure out how to feed the motor, because it's not going to run without air. Drag racing, you weren't relegated. I know the scoops, the hoods, and all that stuff, they all changed and how you took air in. And y'all knew this, but did NHRA, IHRA, did they regulate a lot of how it took air?
He has a hood scoop
They've
story
set
for
a
you.
height on the hood scoop, maximum height off the hood. I think it was 11 inches or whatever it was. But I don't know how many hundreds of hours I've got in wind tunnel time.
Whoa.
But in your case, were you ever able to instrument the car to see how much pressurization you got in that air entrance at the base of the windshield?
We finally did that on our own because we couldn't afford the wind tunnel time. So we had to do that on our own. So we had to go to Talladega, because we spent days at Talladega pressuring different areas to figure that out. But it's difficult to do when you've got to go out and make some laps and you're making subtle changes, made differences in some areas, hurt some areas, helped some areas. So it was a process. It was definitely a process.
And you couldn't run any data acquisition during a race. You had to do it during testing. Okay.
That's right.
Aerodynamics, since y'all brought it up, how were we checking aerodynamics on the car, Warren, back then?
Wind tunnel time, most of the time. And that was kind of an interesting deal. I think the first exposure I had to actual wind tunnel time was 84 Cutlass. And that was kind of like the Chevy Monte Carlo. It was built with a miter box and a square. So it had a lot of aero problems. And the wind tunnel at GM at the time, you could run 130 miles an hour, and then you had to interpolate up to 180 or whatever we were running at that point. But you sit in a car, at 180 miles an hour, you're looking around, and that hood is bending there, the windshield's bent over here. You notice that stuff, and it's got to have a significant effect. So I lobbied, we got to get these things up to real race speeds. And that's when we first went to the Lockheed Tunnel, where you could actually run the real race speed. In fact, I think the first sweep we had was on that Frenza at like 206 miles an hour.
Was this a rolling road tunnel at the time?
No, I've never been on a rolling road. Okay. We were going to go because there was one over in Southern California, but we never did get to that. And it's like a dyno. It's just a tool. You have to learn what it's telling you, and then make your appropriate changes. But it was definitely a tool. And most people, they just want to make the car slippery. Well, the driver will tell you, no, it needs aero balance. It needs downforce front, downforce rear, minimum drag. So there's a whole different learning curve there when you look at it from just a pure drag point, aero horsepower as they call it, to drivability and so forth. So the wind tunnel it's like a dyno. It's just a tool.
What was your wind tunnel, Gary?
Well, mine was a little more interesting. It probably was a little earlier than Warren. You had to be a little bit observant in the cars when we had comfortable tracks to drive on, particularly in the early days. But now we taped on a lot of little markers and whatnot, took 8mm and 16mm films in the car to see exactly what was going on. Our main concern was what was going to happen with a scoop. I actually did scoop testing for A&A fiberglass at that time. So I've probably got as many, if not more, laps with some odd scoops, including the Formula 5000 stuff. And that's a whole probably conversation within itself. But our wind tunnel testing was basically was just that. We took pictures and whatnot. This gentleman, Warren, gave me more information what was going on in the wind tunnel than probably anybody did. But even though it was after my actual race time of driving cars, the interest never stops. And I can tell you, and what Warren had told me during those times when it was going on, specifically the O's times, it just manifests a whole new area that I wanted to know about. But basically on our cars back in our days, we immediately, with the big motored cars, because I did a lot of mountain motor racing, we learned things about the bodies that made them drive better. Quote, I say drive better, I equate that to handling better. And then we learned a whole lot about actually downforce on cars. Because if something magically went on once we passed 160 or 70, 80 mile an hour in a square box, and I'm sure, Dan, you guys went through it, but even to me in my world, but it was so much good information on, quote, wind tunnel that Warren shared with me back in the days, it just flabbergasted me. And somehow it's very comical, by the way, very comical. But that, for the most part, is it. It really is.
Let's talk about comical for a minute. Dan alluded to the sound of the car at Talladega. What was the sound of the car when you showed up with a cross-plane crank, Gary? Anybody notice?
Well, they did. In the pits, it was mentioned, and because there's a lot of ears on you all the time.
First of all, tell us what a cross-plane crank is.
That probably doesn't need to be discussed. But anyhow, we were given a cross-plane crank, and we put it in the car. And the first couple of outings on it, and I'd had it on the dyno, by the way. The first couple of outings on it was just more interesting. I'm trying to figure out how to make because it really changed the dynamics of the car in a big way. Specifically because when I got it, we were running straight shift transmissions. Mm-hmm. We didn't have our planetaries or anything at the time. So it changed a lot of how that was. But you never could get by the comments of the sound of it. It was very unique sound. Someone would almost say it was pitiful sounding because we're all used to a certain tone of engine, especially going through RPM ranges and what have you. But shortly thereafter, the Sankston body said that I didn't need to do that anymore. But I will say this for the benefit of it, the Top Fuel World benefited from it for about 2 years of it. But and I did build some short track stuff. Dan probably knows a few of these too. Mm-hmm. And a few of the short track motors I built actually ran in the wrong direction with them. Mm-hmm. But little things you learn along the way that you got to stay between the gray areas, specifically in round racing. But in drag racing, it was more of a exercise than it was anything.
Running
any true merits to running a 180-degree crank back in those days, I probably never took the development to where it needed to be.
Dan was smiling during that whole conversation.
Yeah.
Tell us about it, Dan.
It's intriguing to listen to the similarities because I never equated the two per se of the fact of Warren was talking about balance. You were talking about the different things that you could do to the motor, the different ways it made, and everybody pays attention. Everybody looks at the cars. Even Bill has said on the radio when they was running, he said the car in front of me, the body's off to the left, and how different it was, and NASCAR just made more rules. They kept you busy enough that you didn't have time to cheat by the changes they were making, but the difference, the balance of the cars is so unique in the fact that Ford, to me, the 82 Thunderbird ended up being a great race car when we figured out how to get air to the cowl. it was a great race car. And we ran it against when we ran at Daytona in 83, that's really what helped us get the Ford deal, was the fact that we took the 82 car and outrun the 83 car. But the 83 car was so aerodynamic, it sucked air away from the cowl, so the motor couldn't run. And then you learn from that body, that was a terrible body design in the beginning until you massaged it, because I'm like Bill, you could have taken the car and turned it around backwards on the frame and run faster. It just the way the body was made, and really the race car that made the biggest difference was we learned a lot about the 82 car, and then the 83 through the 88 car was the same basic design, except in 87, 88 they raised the deck lid in the trunk area, which gave you the balance.
Yep.
And there's the key. And until GM came in and did the what was the one they did with the big back glice that offset that?
Yeah, the Aero Coupes.
Aero Coupes, yeah.
Yeah, that gave the GM cars the balance they needed. You really hadn't thought very much about that, but it was a lot like Bill said about going to Talladega. Actually ended up being our wind tunnel, because we couldn't really afford the time, and we did a lot of testing. It was the closest thing to us that really could tell you several things, not only body-wise but motor-wise. It was basically your best dyno that you could actually do, but it took a lot of time to do this. So you learned a lot from that racetrack, and a lot of things in theory didn't work in practicality when you got to the racetrack.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
the measure we went to, the first time I can remember ever going to Daytona and having several motors, because we were limited in the beginning and we didn't have a lot of stuff, but I can remember going to Daytona, and in the course of the week and a half you're down there, I think we changed the same motor 7 times, just going through different combinations of camshafts, and at that time you could run a mushroom lifter, which the mushroom, you've got to pull the cam out, then drop the lifters. It's you can look that up. It's kind of like describing the subsoiler. You can look that up, and that's an earth-tilling instrument. And but the mushroom lifter it made it difficult to do a cam change, because the lifters had to come out after the cam, and you got to hold lifters up with clothespins. That's how we did it, and had a little aluminum tray you slipped in and dropped the lifters in. But we went through a lot of engines during that time, because we were looking for the combination that according to what the driver would say, this motor sucks up to the car in front of us better than the other motor, which means that it has the ability to accelerate better than your competition or the engine that you had in prior to that. It had certain abilities, and the dyno couldn't measure that.
To that point,
At that point, the dyno could not measure that.
Okay, to the point of what Dan just said, and I'm sure Warren will agree with me here, we have engines, and specifically in the road race and the circle track world, but we have engines that don't race well.
That's it.
Don't
Make
race
more
well.
horsepower. Probably
Yeah.
make more horsepower.
Well, you always take your best bullet to the racetrack anyhow. Your best bullet. The bullet was judged on the dyno. But due to other circumstances, certain engines, specifically in the road race stuff and whatnot, don't race well. Now, that's a whole nother description, but he's describing, and when I've had racers, and then me being involved with racers have multiple engines in the circle track world of different types, you fully understand when a guy calls you on the phone, because first of all, you know whatever motor he's got looks like on a dyno. That's all I've got to work with.
Yeah.
But hey, we've got motor C, for instance, and it races better than the rest. And then as an engine builder, you go back and you look at all the notes.
And scratch your head.
Yes, but there is such thing as engines that race good. Not necessarily made the most power on the dyno, but it's that tool again that Warren talks about.
Yeah.
There was something there we couldn't test.
And
in
I
the dyno
could see, on a circle track with different brands of cars, how the air acts on those cars, how it affects your air. In road racing, it would be very difficult because you've got so many, so you've got 4 different types of cars or 5 different types of cars on the track.
But the engine is your variable, and the car
Yeah.
is your standard, and it's not changing, but you're changing different motors, and that motor is, as you say, it does race better. It will draw up to the car in front of it. It reacts better in competition, in traffic, than other cars do. And that was another thing, is the car might not run too good by itself, but you get it in traffic around other cars.
Yeah.
And it's like Bill said, whenever we won that first Daytona race with the restrictor plate, I think it was Rick Wilson that car, Bill got around it, and our car was Jack the Bear. Around other cars, it would not perform near as well, but it got sniffed anywhere around that car, and it was quicker than anything. So we were able to latch on to Rick and basically win the race because of that
Of his car. Warren, did you get in any of that with? Because obviously drag racing, you're cars side by side.
Yeah, Warren's got a funny look on his face.
Were there cars that affected you by being beside you necessarily, or?
Not on a drag strip. You're too far apart to have an aero effect from another car. But yeah, I did some work in the round track area for Junior Johnson, and
say it ain't so.
It was kind of strange that the whole thing came around.
Yeah.
Keith Fowler, who was Ricky Smith,
Yeah, right.
knew Junior, and that's how the whole thing came around. Well, I told Junior, I said, I'll take a look at your stuff. I can't guarantee you anything, and I'm right in the middle of racing, so I need a yardstick. Bring one of your things over. I'll run it on our dyno just to get an idea of what you got.
Where you at?
And so he brought one from Darlington. That's when they had qualifying motors.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he said it's a race motor. Junior, dumb like a fox.
You think?
The thing was still warm when I got to the shop, so I knew it was a qualifying motor. We ran it, and I told him, okay, I'll do the cylinder heads, the camshaft, and the carburetor and intake manifold. You guys, I haven't got time to screw with the short block. Just build a short block, but do not touch the top of the pistons. I'll finish them myself. Got it, because these heads were... I honestly don't know whether they were legal at the time. We put it in, got the whole thing together, and it was 48 more horsepower than they had, and 35 foot-pounds of torque. Which the torque to me was way more important than the horsepower number, because that's how you get off the turn. They put in Neil's car, put it in the wall, first turn. And Neil had been by the shop like a week before on that Hidden Heroes deal. He called
So this
the shop.
would have been about 84, 85?
Yeah, and he calls the shop and says, what the heck did you do? Well, I told Junior what it is. Well, he didn't tell anybody in the shop that it was that much different. So they ran it, and they ran real well with it. And the deal with, after it's all said and done, when they're done with it, I get the heads, the intake manifold, and the camshaft back, and carburetor.
Right.
Because he said it would, technically, the fuel mileage was so good in it, it would eliminate one fuel stop in a 500-mile race.
Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff.
That to me, racing is racing is racing. It's just an air pump.
Well,
It's an air pump, but it's got to be an efficient air pump.
Oh,
absolutely,
absolutely, yeah.
I knew I was going to hear air pumping this somewhere.
we're
I
going to
heard
talk
it back
about
my head.
we're going to talk about air pumps in the next segment. You guys got enough time to do another short segment here. I want to kind of wrap up with some of the things that you invented along the way. Innovations, they're called. All right. Thank you guys for being here. We're going to do another quick segment and call it a day.